Hi, everyone, and welcome to episode 596 of People Behind the Science. I'm your host, Dr. Marie McNeely, and I am delighted to have you joining me today to hear from our guest scientist, Dr. Lily Wang. We are excited to be rebroadcasting her interview originally published on November 7th of 2014. Now, listeners, Lily is applying her background in engineering and acoustics to conduct fascinating research on how to control noise in rooms, as well as how the acoustics of a room may impact how we perceive sound and how people may perform, for example, in a classroom setting. She has received numerous awards for her innovative work, and Lily shares more about her life and research in our interview. So listeners, get ready to learn more and get inspired by Lily in this episode of People Behind the Science.
Every day, discoveries are made that will change our understanding of the world around us. Dr. Marie McNeely is here to bring you the brilliant minds who are making these discoveries so they can share their incredible stories and take you on an amazing journey. Welcome to People Behind the Science.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of People Behind the Science. I am delighted to be here today with Dr. Lily Wang. So great to chat with you today, Lily. How's everything going?
Very well, thank you.
Wonderful. Well, we are delighted to chat with you today. So I'm excited to introduce you to all of our listeners. Now, Lily is a professor in the Durham School of Architectural Engineering and Construction, as well as the Associate Dean for Graduate Programs and Faculty Development in the College of Engineering at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln. She received her PhD in acoustics from Pennsylvania State University, and she then worked as a research fellow in the Department of Acoustic Technology at the Technical University of Denmark before accepting her faculty position there at University of Nebraska, Lincoln. Now, Lily has received many awards and honors during her career, including the R. Bruce Lindsay Award, which is the top award given by the Acoustical Society of America to a person under 35. And Lily has also been awarded a National Science Foundation Career Award, as well as numerous awards from the University of Nebraska, Lincoln for teaching and mentorship. She is also an elected fellow of the Acoustical Society of America and is currently serving as the Society's Vice President-elect. Now, Lily is here with us today to tell us all about her journey through life and science. So today, we want to get to know you, Lily, both as a scientist, but also as a person. So can you take a few minutes here to tell us what you like to do when you're not doing science?
Well, I do certainly enjoy running around with my two little girls. I have two daughters, a 4-year-old and a 6-year-old. And so it's definitely true that these days when I'm not doing science, I'm basically playing My Little Pony with them. But if it's not circling around children, I also love to sing. Honestly, my first dream job when I was very little was to be some kind of nightclub singer, but I don't really have a voice that's good enough for people to pay to hear me sing. So I do it for fun on the side. I like singing in choirs and love singing karaoke. I have a karaoke machine that Santa Claus brought me for Christmas. And,
wonderful.
That's a lot of fun too.
That sounds great. You can enjoy some little trios with your daughters. I think that sounds fantastic.
Yes, a lot of Frozen songs right now.
Yes. Well, that is wonderful, Lily. It's great to hear about what you like to do when you're not working, spending some time with your kids, enjoying some singing on the side. That sounds wonderful. So can you tell us next a little bit more about what you do at work? In particular, how do you describe what you do to someone who's not in science?
Yeah, I feel extraordinarily lucky. I'm one of the very few professors in the world working in an area that's called architectural acoustics. And to someone who's not in science, I would say it's basically how sound behaves in buildings. And so on the glamorous side, it would be like studying concert halls and performing arts facilities, you know, knowing that I couldn't be the star on the stage, I can now design the space in which
make them sound amazing, yes.
Right. But on the not glamorous side, but still very important, would be the acoustic design of everyday buildings like restaurants, offices, apartment buildings, any space that we occupy.
Certainly. So have you optimized parts of your house maybe to enhance your singing?
So actually, I have not, although the flip side of enhancing acoustics is reducing noise. And we do, in my house, have a lot of low noise appliances.
Oh, good.
We're crazy about getting very quiet dishwashers and washing machines and bathroom fans. So, yeah.
That is wonderful.
We are sensitive to it.
You're acoustically savvy. Yeah.
Right.
Well, wonderful to hear about some of these questions that you're answering in your research. Now, can you tell us, with all the things you're trying to do in a day, I mean, getting these amazing questions answered, playing with your daughters, getting your My Little Pony time in, how do you get it all done in a day? Is there a motivational quote or maybe a saying that you love to keep in your mind?
Yes. So I believe that hard work is very critical to it. And so there is that famous Thomas Edison quote about how genius is 1% inspiration and 99% perspiration. And I completely agree with that there is some brilliance, perhaps maybe a little bit of brilliance, but a lot of it is just hard work. And then coming to the end to have this awesome, amazing result is very satisfying. So I think it has to be that combination that I enjoyed this work that I'm doing, but I do also have to put the work in to get the grand result in the end.
Absolutely. Being brilliant is not enough. You have to put the work in.
Right. Absolutely.
Fantastic motivational quote. And I think really important for being in science. You have to put those hours of work in to get the amazing results. It doesn't just happen overnight.
Right.
So can you tell us a little bit more now about some of the people who may have inspired you or served as role models along your journey?
Yeah. So I came to this field of acoustics because actually of that love for music. I'd always loved to sing, but at the same time I really did very well in math and science. And so it was a textbook when I was, I think, 15 years old in a physics class. They had little boxes of careers you could do in physics, and one of them talked about being an acoustic engineer. And I thought, well, that's it. That's exactly what I'm going to do. I love music, but I also love math and science, and I can do well at it. And so I decided to pursue that path. But it's not something you can look up at your university down the street to find an acoustics degree. So one of the first persons I met in acoustics was named Yves Berthelot, and he was a professor, he still is, a professor at Georgia Tech. And back then he was a very shiny new professor, probably like an assistant professor, and he was very kind because Atlanta wasn't very far from where I grew up in Chattanooga, Tennessee. So the summer of my sophomore year, I found him through the Acoustical Society of America, emailed him. Actually, that's probably not true. Email was probably not common back then, but let's just say I did something like email him.
Wrote a heartfelt letter. Yeah.
And he very kindly invited me as a 19-year-old to come spend the summer working in his research lab at Georgia Tech. And that was so wonderful to, finally get involved in scientific discovery. And he was very active in many, many different research projects, and I didn't know really enough to be able to formulate the questions or really understand what to do. I mean, sometimes my job was as simple as feeding the fish.
Very important job, yes.
Because the fish were a subject of acoustic study, how fish hearing was being done. But it was still fun to be around all those graduate students and postdocs, and also Dr. Berthelot. And I certainly considered him a role model ever since then, because he himself was also a career award winner and also an R. Bruce Lindsay Award winner.
Following in his footsteps. I like it.
Yeah, exactly. Just trying to be just like Dr. Berthelot. And in some ways it's still happening, because now what's interesting is he made a great impact on our science, but then in some ways now he's left that area of impact and gone into academic leadership. So currently he's vice provost, I think, at Georgia Tech. And I still continue calling him every now and then to ask about how he finds his life and how he enjoys that aspect now of university administration. Because I myself, as you mentioned at the beginning, have just recently stepped into an associate dean role myself. So it's like that tiny step down the academic administration pathway. But anyway, I've always considered him one of my favorite role models.
Wonderful. It is great to hear about this role model, and amazing to hear that, just through one letter that you wrote, trying to just get in touch with somebody to get a little bit more information on it, kind of spawned into this whole amazing mentorship relationship. I think that's fantastic. Mm-hmm. And I think it's important to point out that sometimes all you need is that initial contact to really get in touch with the right person who can really help shape your career. So now, can you tell us a little bit more about where this interest in science started? You mentioned kind of at a young age being interested in acoustics. Was there any other field that you had considered before that, or when did your interest in science really begin?
Yes, that's a great question. I remember really enjoying chemistry as well. I think I took chemistry in 9th grade, had a wonderful chemistry teacher. I actually went to an all-female high school from 7th to 12th grade. I felt that was a wonderful experience for me. I know that probably not all young girls would actually prefer to go to all-girls school, but for me it was great. I don't have anything to compare with, but I just felt like we were encouraged to flourish in math and science. And so it was that 9th grade teacher, that chemistry teacher that, really encouraged me and like working on these chemistry experiments. And I just loved it. I actually did at that time, because that was before I took the physics class, I did think about becoming a chemist, or I think I always enjoyed the discovery parts of it, the learning that there's always something new and just understanding how things worked. Now that I'm an engineer, it's a lot the same. When I try to recruit younger engineers, I always point that question now, like, do you like to know how things work and really want to learn about how to make the world better? Because those are core things that motivate me daily.
Certainly. Well, it's great to hear about this first love of yours, chemistry, that got you hooked in science, and then, pivoting a little bit more towards the acoustics, towards the engineering fields. I think that is fascinating. So can you tell us a little bit more now, taking us from this early interest in science to where you are today? Some of these key moments along the way that really got you there.
Yeah, so I went to Princeton, where they didn't have an acoustics degree, but I did want to do engineering at that point. And I also knew I wanted to work in buildings because I had that dream of being the concert hall designer. And so I pursued a civil engineering degree there. And they had a sub-discipline of architecture, so you could add in the building side. But I missed the acoustics, and that's why I sought out those summer opportunities, the first one with Dr. Bertolo, and then I did also have some other following summer internships with acoustical consultants. There actually are about 100 acoustical consulting firms, and I located some of those and worked there. And the whole time, honestly, I meant to become a consultant. Actually, that was the dream at that point in time, was I was going to design concert halls. But it didn't happen because, honestly, when I graduated, the economy was really bad.
Right.
So there was no job opportunities, and I had been hearing about this graduate program in acoustics at Penn State, one of the only programs in the world where you would get an actual PhD in acoustics. And so when the economy's bad, people go to graduate school. So that's what
I was there as well. Yeah.
And funny enough, I actually thought I was just going to get a MS, so I'd just give it 2 years, get a master's degree, and then I was going to go and be an acoustical consultant, design concert halls. But it was another professor at that time, Vic Sparrow at Penn State, who sat me down. He was, I think, the graduate advisor to all incoming acoustic students. So he sat me down probably a year into my study and said to me, you know what, you really should consider doing a PhD. And at that point, I had never, ever thought about my father had a PhD in mechanical engineering, but I wanted to do acoustics. I always wanted to do acoustics, since I was 15. Now I'm 22, and I didn't hear from the people working in the consulting that a PhD was necessary. The opposite. At that time, most of those folks advised against it, thinking that it was too specialized. Mm-hmm. But Dr. Sparrow was very convincing. He indicated, and I say this now to my own students, that a PhD really opens doors, if you think about it, that now it does open up this other opportunity that you can continue doing cutting-edge science and pushing the field and things that you couldn't do if you didn't get that terminal degree. So luckily I got funding. That was always helpful. That somehow I did get some funding from the National Science Foundation through their Graduate Research Fellowship program, which allowed me to design my own PhD. I studied violin acoustics because there really wasn't a faculty member there who could help me do something on concert halls, but there was one who was interested in musical instruments, my advisor, Dr. Courtney Burrows. And so he was very supportive and mentored me on this very interesting, but not architecturally oriented PhD project. And at the end of that, I was like, okay, now I'm going to go design concert halls.
Dust off the resume, yeah.
Be a consultant. But there is like one possibility, which was that I could apply for this postdoctoral fellowship offered by the Acoustical Society, where I could write up whatever I wish I could have done, and maybe there'd be a chance that I got it. So I did. I wrote it up to basically study concert hall acoustics, not design, but to study more about concert hall acoustics and perception of that in Denmark. And lo and behold, I was selected for that postdoc. So I was like, okay, well, one more year then. So I went off to Denmark, and it was a wonderful experience learning more about how they do science there. But on the side, I traveled a lot. I went into major credit card debt.
Worth it. Worth every penny.
Yeah, exactly. Completely worth every penny. Because I traveled and heard concert halls all across Europe, and it was such a memorable experience, and I'm glad that I have treasured that time. And then that's when I was like, okay, this year's almost over. Now I'm going to join a consulting firm. But strangely enough, I got a phone call from the University of Nebraska. Because it never occurred to me that I would actually get a job that did research in architectural acoustics, because there weren't really that many out there. That I didn't know any professors that did architectural acoustics.
You're the only one I know, so yeah.
Yeah, well, now I think there's like 3 or 4. I could name them, but yeah, it's very few of us. And, that didn't seem to be a very pragmatic dream. But there aren't that many more people who design concert halls, but there were more of them than professors. So I got this call from Nebraska, and it happened to be through a networking opportunity. Like, I was on a graduate student council when I was at Penn State, and one of my fellow colleagues on that council had gotten a job at Nebraska as a faculty member. And when she heard that they were looking for somebody to do acoustics within their architectural engineering program, she thought of me. So she gave them my name, and that's how they found me. And I'm ever grateful to such sorts of organizations. That's something that I try to emphasize also to the students I work with now, that it's not just about doing good science in a way, but also communicating with other people and connecting, that some of these connections we make as a graduate student council representative or at a conference with other students will somehow open up into these amazing opportunities. So I flew here from Copenhagen to Nebraska on a very cold December day, and they offered me the job, and I thought, okay, I'll do it for 5 years. When, I'll be up for tenure. And if I don't get tenure, no problem. I'll go design concert halls then. But luckily or unluckily, depends on how you see it, they did give me tenure, and now this is my 14th year at Nebraska, and I just think in some ways I feel so lucky in a way that my career path took the route it did. I'm sure it would have been fun the other way too, but nowadays, I still interface and talk a lot with my colleagues who do design concert halls, and I kind of feel lucky that I get to study them and actually work with all of those consultants, and I don't have to do what they do, which is work on the interface with clients and budgets. There's a lot more other stuff they have to deal with. And yes, there's other stuff I deal with too besides just doing science. But I enjoy actually those other things I do, which often now impact education and training the next generation of engineers and scientists. So I'm very happy that all these happenstance things happened and that I am where I am now.
Well, Lily, that sounds like an amazing journey. And I love that at every step of it, you had that, okay, and then I'll be an acoustical consultant. And then,
right, exactly.
But never came to fruition. Fate kept pulling you in another direction.
That's right.
Well, great to hear about your journey. And I think just fascinating how you knew so early on what you wanted to do and just following that dream all the way through, even moving towards more of a research direction, but still answering those questions related to acoustics and design. So can you tell us a little bit now about one of these projects that you are working on that you are so excited about?
Yes. I have one PhD student, Ellen Pang, who's about to graduate, and the project that she and I have been working on has been about how acoustic conditions in buildings, particularly like how loud the background noise is or how echoey the room is, we call that reverberation, how these two characteristics of room can impact how well students learn. So I'm very interested in, the impact of the acoustic environment on the people inside. And so the research question in that particular case, if I just were to lay it out straight out, it would be, how does a classroom acoustic environment impact student learning and student achievement? And so she's actually the most recent graduate. I've been working maybe in this area for 7 years now, and it's very exciting. We've done studies in local school districts where we go and measure the acoustics in those classrooms, and then we get the data from the schools on how the students in those classrooms perform on their student achievement scores, the standardized ones, and we do statistical analyses to link them. And our studies have repeatedly shown that the level of noise in a classroom, and that noise could come from mostly maybe the heating ventilation systems, it could be from outdoors, it could even be from like a hallway or other classrooms in the facility or even students within the classroom. But all those sources of noise, the higher the level that noise is, there is a correlation that student achievement, particularly in language arts areas, reduces. And so I feel really excited with that because we've been working on getting that into standards for how you build classrooms so that as we renovate and build new classrooms for students to learn in, that we build appropriate acoustic environments so that we can improve learning. Again, it's that impact, that you working in science and studying and getting a good evidence-based reason for designing a building a certain way, which will impact generations of children.
Absolutely. So aside from when you're constructing completely new classrooms, now that you have this finding, are there things that classrooms that are in schools already constructed where they don't necessarily have much of a remodeling budget can do to reduce some of these noise levels? Are you recommending maybe putting in carpeting or, covering walls or things like that?
Yeah, and actually a lot of the acoustical consultants already have such recommendations readily available. It's just that a lot of times the schools have to decide whether or not it's worth the money to spend. So everybody knows it'd be better,
right,
if the noise level were better, but they're not always willing to spend the money until they get to see some data that, oh, look, when the noise level was this,
right,
the students didn't. Like, there's a tangible impact of it. So I think in our case, we aren't necessarily pushing the science on how the corrections can be made because some of those, you're right, they're very common. Putting in acoustical ceiling tile, building walls all the way to the structure.
Right.
Not putting the loud mechanical equipment next to your classroom. Some of it's very obvious in some ways, but to get the research that shows that there is an effect. And I mentioned Ellen, our most recent project, which is her project, also is talking about students who don't speak English as a first language. Mm-hmm. Because they are surprisingly, I think 20% of the United States population of children don't speak English at home. So there's a very large proportion of students who don't speak English at home, but then they come to a classroom where they are taught in English. And we're finding that bad classroom acoustic conditions actually impact them even worse. They are even more sensitive. Like the noise levels need to be even quieter for them. So it's exciting. But I would say that moving forward on this, one thing that I get asked about, and maybe your listeners would also question this, is, well, what about lighting? What about the temperature? What about the formaldehyde content, indoor air quality? How important is the acoustics? The school administrator has to decide, am I going to fix the acoustics or am I going to
put in an air conditioner?
Exactly, right. And so what I'm very excited about, we are almost ready to start a study that will look at all of those issues because I'm in an architectural engineering department, and that's the great thing of this department is we actually do have people who design the heating, ventilation, air conditioning, and people who design the lighting, and people who do air quality, and myself who does acoustics. And so we formed a core group, and we're planning to now take a broader look at all of those qualities of the indoor environment and try to have some data to give back again to school builders and parents and administrators about where best to spend your money.
Well, that is fascinating. And I think, a lot of those things that you're mentioning, things like lighting and the air conditioning or the ventilation work, things like that, can affect the acoustics as well. Everyone knows that, buzzing fluorescent light noise, does that impact performance? Things like that. So very, very interesting to kind of put all these different environmental pieces together and figure out what has the biggest impact. I like that.
Yeah.
So fascinating research. And Lily, I think we've made your adventure through science just sound like an amazing journey. We've hit along some of these high points, all these different pivot points in your career. We haven't yet touched on some of the struggles that you've encountered. And I think every scientist goes through these periods in their career where they look back and it's just days or weeks or maybe even longer where it just seemed like everything was going wrong or you were fighting against everything. So can you think back on your career and tell us about one of these tumultuous periods, one of these times when you were struggling with something or had a major failure, and tell us how you worked through it?
Yeah, the one that stands out for me is actually when I was still fairly junior. So when I was a PhD student at Penn State, and I did have some difficulties because there weren't a lot of people around who did violin acoustic research that I could readily ask, how do I deal with this or that? And I was also in some ways, because I had brought my own funding, that was nice, but in other ways I was also lowest on the totem pole for access to equipment and stuff. Other people had funded research projects from the Navy.
Right.
And they got to use their equipment first, and I sort of had to beg and be nice and be like, oh, can I use that?
Notice it's free at 3 a.m. Yeah.
Like when you're not testing with it. And that was hard. So there were years, at least 1 year, where I was doing heavy experimental work, and I had to do it in the middle of the night when nobody else was using the anechoic chamber or the equipment I was using, and things weren't going well because anybody who's done experimental work knows that sometimes things just don't work. The cables are broken. These things happen. And so I think the things that helped, and I wouldn't be surprised if your other interviewees have sort of similar things, are just, having family, friends there to help and support you through that. My family and friends, they love to get me lattes and chocolate.
Ooh, I like that.
Just to pick up my spirits. I tend to be an optimist anyway, and so maybe that's all it takes. It's lattes, just some caffeine and sugar.
So what kind of chocolate would you prefer? Did you have a pick-me-up chocolate of choice?
I really like Twix bars.
Solid choice. I love those as well.
Yeah. One of my daughters also has that same predilection now. So the other one likes Reese's, which, Reese's aren't bad either.
Right. They have their merits, but a good Twix bar will really make your day.
Yeah. I like sharing that story even with my current grad students because it's funny now as a faculty member, it's kind of true. I'm not on the front line anymore. I'm not the one who's in the lab dealing with the fact that the signal's not going through and having to figure out where the broken point is. But I like to tell them this is common. There is this part of research that things don't always go well, but take a break when you need to. Get some coffee and chocolate.
Right. Certainly. Well, we love sharing these stories from all of these successful scientists like yourself that we chat with on this program. So listeners out there who might be going through struggles, get that same feeling that they're not alone. Everyone goes through this, and it's not the end of the world. You can continue on and have a successful career, even if you go through many of these very tumultuous, struggling periods, fighting with the equipment. And it's not something that's going to impede success in your scientific career if you know how to deal with it, if you have those friends and family to help you through the situation. Helps if you have some collaborators or colleagues that you can work with to get through some of these tough times. But
that is absolutely true. And one other point I would add to that is that the other skill I think we need to develop as we progress in scientific research is just try to think outside the box. So if I really thought I needed this piece of equipment to do this research, is there another way to get at the same answers I want? So I like to advise my current students that, don't think that just because we don't have a special piece of equipment here in Nebraska that we can't do this research or answer that question. I always like to think we should be problem solving it to figure out how we can answer it. So yes, there'll be tough times, there'll be problems, but keep your mind open and there will be solutions.
Yes, they're out there somewhere.
Yeah.
Well, I love to hear about how people get through these difficult points in their career. And like we said, it's not the end of the world. There's a way through it, and you just have to find that solution. So great to hear about your story. Now, can you tell us next about one of these success stories, a happy time in your lab or with your students? And this can be one of these big successes like grants or papers, things like that, or even just one of these little successes along the way.
So I am proud of the science that I've done, but in some ways, I also, in a way, am more proud these days about how I've been developing the younger generation of scientists and engineers. And I have graduated now, I think, 5 PhD students, and 4 of them are also now faculty members at other institutions. And it's just so exciting to see that sort of fractal growth. It's like this spreading out of, just excitement for our field and developing a real core scientific community in architectural acoustics in the United States. I'm very proud of that success, that there is this impact in our field, but also is like developing people and building community.
That sounds wonderful. And I love that you can just tell from the way you're talking about it that you are so excited about the successes of your students and the fact that they're able to go on and contribute to the field and become successful researchers. I think that's wonderful. So congratulations on those 5 PhD students that you've graduated. I wish you many more.
Yeah, thank you.
Absolutely. So I love hearing about these different success stories in science. And certainly, I know researchers keep so busy with all the work that they're trying to do and also trying to balance their life outside of science that it doesn't always leave a lot of free time to sit back, relax, and enjoy a good book, unless perhaps it's one of the books you read with your children.
Right.
Right. Can you tell us, Lily, about a book that you've read recently and really enjoyed that you think we should check out?
The one that just recently kept me up at night, it's a series of books right now, but it's the Lunar Chronicle series. The author is Marissa Meyer, and there's 3 out right now. The first one's called Cinder, the second one's Scarlet, and the third one's Crest. And what I love about this series is that it's a combination of fantasy, science fiction, and futuristic stuff, and romance too. So
it's got it all.
Yeah, it's got it all. I highly recommend it to all your listeners and to you as well. And there's going to be a 4th one coming out too. But it's very interesting because what she's done is she's taken elements of the fairy tales. They were Cinderella, Rapunzel, Little Red Riding Hood, and Snow White. She's taken elements of those fairy tales but woven them into this futuristic story in a futuristic world where there's cyborgs and androids. Oh, it's very interesting. I hope that tantalizes all of you.
Yeah.
Check it out. And it's easy read. I read it, on a plane. And then, I couldn't stop when I got home. I was like, I have to finish the rest of this.
So close. Grab a latte, yeah.
I actually don't like reading nonfiction very much, although I always wish I did. But I find that that's the thing. I can't have a nonfiction book on my bedside table and find that I'll actually read it. But I actually do have a relatively long commute on certain days, and so I have started listening to audiobooks while I'm in the car, and I've been forcing myself to just do nonfiction books as audiobooks. And one that I recently finished there on that end was Sheryl Sandberg's Lean In book. And I was honestly a bit skeptical when I heard all of the kerfuffle and hoopla around that book. I was thinking to myself, I'm basically around Sheryl Sandberg's age. I was like, I lived through it. I don't think she has anything.
Yeah, she hasn't seen anything I haven't. Yeah,
I haven't heard or anything. But honestly, I really enjoyed it. And I have been recommending it to all of my female colleagues here at the university and also my female mentees. There is still a perception, real or not, that we as females have a bit of a harder time in science and engineering fields. And I really liked Sheryl's take on it.
Those are excellent recommendations, Lily. I'll be sure to put those out on our website for all of our listeners to find there if they want to check them out. Now, in addition to a lot of the wonderful work that scientists are able to do in the lab and the joy that they get from mentoring students, one of the great things about the career that we haven't chatted about yet too much are some of the opportunities for travel. Now, you mentioned you did a postdoc in Denmark, which is fantastic. But can you think back now on all these different opportunities you've had for travel, maybe conferences, working with collaborators, things like that, and tell us about your favorite place that you've been to and why it was so memorable?
Yes, so I will second that is definitely a sort of perk of being in research, and particularly in the academic fields, that I regularly travel to 4 conferences a year, and they are all over the world. I'm going to Melbourne this November. I've been to Hong Kong, Hawaii, all these exciting places that I wouldn't have imagined. And these days, it sometimes is hard to actually get out and enjoy the locale because you end up sort of being in the conference hotel the whole time and talking very exciting science, but you don't really get to visit the city. But there is one conference series that I've gone to which has the name of being the Concert Hall Research Group Summer Institute.
Oh, wow.
Also known as the HRG Summer Institute. And there have been 5 of those. And I would say that those 5, or that series of conferences, have been the ones that I've enjoyed the most. So they've all been exciting. Like the first one was at Tanglewood, the summer home of the Boston Symphony. The second one was in Saratoga Springs. They have a summer facility there too. Then we went to Aspen, where we heard the Aspen Music Festival, Santa Fe, where we saw the Santa Fe Opera, and then this past one we were just at Chicago listening to the Grant Park Orchestra play in the summer. And so I think what's so fun about those places, the whole conference is focused on concert hall and performing arts spaces, which, as you've already heard, is something that I still do really like to talk about. And then we all go to these facilities together and listen and think about what is it in the room that's making it sound that way. And so I know that perhaps doesn't get quite at your question of locales, but it was a combination of those locales with these amazing facilities and this group of usually only 50 to 60 participants, who are all really intent on concert hall acoustics. So
Absolutely. So I am going to ask you a tough question here, Lily. It sounds like you have been to a lot of different music venues and concert halls. Do you have a favorite?
Well, I'm going to be a bit biased, perhaps, and tell you that one that everybody should visit is the Holland Performing Arts Center in Omaha, Nebraska, which is very close to where I live and work.
And bring you Twix bars on the way, yeah.
Yeah, that's right. But most people think of Nebraska as a flyover state, and I will be an ambassador here to say that we've got some wonderful things in the state of Nebraska, and one of them is a really amazing concert hall that was designed, I think, in 2005, so it opened while I was here, which has been really exciting. Designed by Kierkegaard Associates. The Acoustics were from out of Chicago, and they did a fabulous job, and everybody should come and listen.
Wonderful. Well, that sounds incredible. It is great to hear about these opportunities you've had. And I love these small conferences that people describe, like you're saying, 50 or 60 people who are so passionate about this area who can get together. And I love that you guys go listen to different music venues and then discuss sort of the science behind it,
Exactly. That's what I love about it too. Exactly. It's a very intimate one, but then, it's not just sitting there listening to PowerPoint presentations, but actually listening with our ears to what we hear in buildings. And
that is wonderful. And I know in addition to traveling, a lot of scientists really enjoy the company of the people that they get to work with. And I know there's a lot of stereotypes about how scientists are out there, but we're trying to break them here. I know a lot of the scientists that I worked with are just these amazing, creative, and oftentimes very funny people. And, you work so hard, but you have fun and you're people too. So I love to chat about maybe some of the funny traditions or just hilarious memories that have sprung up in these different research groups that you've worked with over the years. So can you share one of these with us today, Lily?
Yeah, so I agree with your assessment. I think I myself personally really do like to have a lot of fun. And one thing that I have encouraged my group, so we have a group that we refer to as NAGS, Nebraska Acoustics Group, and we host a game night at every Acoustical Society conference meeting. So it started out small where I just had it in my hotel room. And we're not talking like football games. We're talking like board games.
Like Candyland and
yeah, those kinds of group games. We usually try to find ones where like large groups can come and play. So we started it fairly small, probably 10, 12 years ago. We just, Mark and I, like Tuesday night, we'll just meet in this hotel room, and that's the thing, it makes memories, and it's always really fun. And I am proud, and maybe also, I can also say a bit sheepishly admit that the last Acoustical Society conference, I had probably 40 or 50 people in a suite that I had rented, and there were noise complaints against us because we were so loud. So we always think it's so funny that, here we are, a bunch of acousticians, acoustics, and we were making too much noise, so the hotel security had to come and shut us down. So
having your wild parties of game night up there.
Wild game nights. The game that we liked to play this last time was called Super Fight. Everybody should look it up. It's really fun.
I've not played it. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah, I think it might have been a Kickstarter game. But yeah, it was fun. I've learned my lessons. At the next one, we're not going to have game night in a hotel room.
Right.
Actually identified a meeting room at the conference facility.
Well, that is awesome. I love this tradition of bringing everyone together at a conference to hang out, play some games, relax, enjoy each other's company. And I think that's a fantastic way to get to know each other, especially for younger scientists who might be intimidated to just, start a research conversation with someone. So you have a nice relaxed atmosphere at game night. You can chat with people.
Exactly.
That is a fantastic tradition. Now, in addition to these amazing traditions and funny memories that you can look back on in science, I really like talking to people about the research questions that they are most excited about. And certainly, I think there's always a long list of questions you wish you could answer. And oftentimes there are limitations like funding and staff and technology, and sometimes even feasibility that are keeping you from answering these questions. Now, can you tell us today, Lily, if we took all of those constraints out of the way, what is one research question that you are just dying to know the answer to?
I would probably still bring it back to concert halls. It's this interesting blend of art and science, that there is some scientific things we can measure about the sound field that we're producing in a concert hall, but at the same time, you're layering human perception on top of it. And so it's hard for me to frame an exact question, but I guess I would still be interested in studying many, many, many concert halls and trying to figure out what it was that made some of them sound good, what made some of them sound bad, what would be good objective ways that we can scientifically quantify that versus, where it's just art and you can't just use numbers to describe it. There was a scientist in Finland, a colleague of mine, who received a large funding grant in the European Union where he basically did this road trip of going to several concert halls and measuring the characteristics in there. And I admit that would be great. I would love to do that, but with the United States, like band of students and other researchers, and hop on a tour bus and just drag our equipment all over the States and make measurements in all those halls and see if we could delve into answering what can we actually design scientifically and what actually is sort of more artistic.
Absolutely. And then you guys can put together the perfect conference hall once you have all the ideas of what makes it so great.
Right. Well, that actually did come up at this last Concert Hall Research Group Summer Institute, which was just a few weeks ago, the point that really there is no perfect concert hall, and perhaps that's not what we should be striving for. We should just be striving for different experiences, but still good ones.
Yeah, well, that's true. There are probably so many different facets. Is it great for different types of groups performing there or different levels of sound, things like that? So very interesting to think about. Mm-hmm. Well, I know here in St. Louis, a lot of the concert halls, they perform all different kinds of music. There's an orchestra in one week, a musical the next week, a rock band the next week. So it's like trying to optimize something for that many different types of performances.
That was also another session. Yeah. On that very topic.
Very interesting. Well, these are some amazing questions, Lily. I love that we've dreamt big here. In addition to some of these amazing questions that you've pondered, a lot of scientists look back on their mentors very fondly. We've chatted about some of these amazing mentors that you've had today. Can you think back now on all the advice that you've ever received in science and in your life and share with us what you would consider just the best piece of advice?
Yes. I can't remember who actually told it to me first, but I also just see it a lot of places. And I have this one hanging on my wall, which is not to let success go to your head or failure go to your heart. And I really love that one because, as we've discussed today, there are going to be failures, but don't make them so internally disheartening. And at the same time, yeah, you're going to have successes, but don't get such a big head. I really like that one a lot. So
I think that is a great quote to keep in your mind. I love that, emphasis on staying humble in the face of success and not beating yourself up over these failures. I think that is fantastic.
Yeah.
Now, Lily, is there any other last piece of advice or maybe last piece of inspiration that you want to share with our listeners now, coming from you personally?
I still really like to emphasize that there is a lot of hard work involved. That yes, it's great if you're naturally smart and talented in math and science. But like in my example, great, I can do math and science, but I combine it with something that I really loved, which was that musical side, and that made it easy to do the hard work. I know maybe it's not easy for everybody to find what it is that they're passionate about, but I do encourage people to look for that because that's what makes it more fun. Yes, we're all doing hard work, but at the same time, it's a lot of fun to be sitting in a concert hall and thinking that this is work. Listening to Wagner and thinking, oh, this is really hard.
That's so hard work, yeah. Well, that is wonderful. I love that message. Certainly knowing you have to put the hard work in, but if you're working on something that you're passionate about, that you're excited or curious about, it makes it almost not feel like work, even if you're putting in those really long hours. And I think that is fantastic advice for our listeners to really find that place where they are very passionate about what they're doing. Now, can you share with our listeners how they can reach out to learn more about you or your research?
Yes. I have a work website, and it is lilywang.unl.edu, and people are welcome to visit there and find my contact information and send me a note. I'd love to hear from them.
Wonderful. Well, listeners, feel free to check out that website. Get in touch with Lily if you have any questions. And Lily, thank you so much for joining us today and sharing your story.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely. This was a lot of fun. Thank you to our listeners out there as well. Join us again next time for another episode of People Behind the Science. Your voyage to the lives of today's exceptional scientists has just begun. You can find everything we talked about today, including our guests' favorite books, biographies, photos, and more, when you visit us at www.peoplebehindthescience.com. I look forward to seeing you next time on People Behind the Science.